All right, good morning, everyone. I know it's been a super terrible week in this area with the fires. I'm sure you all know someone who's been affected. Anything anyone needs, let us know, and I'll share more resources at the beginning of the worship service, but feel free to put people in touch with us or let us know if there are needs, and we can help direct people and respond to what's going on. All right. So we had a really 2 weeks ago powerful, emotionally powerful discussion as we went through the Sodom and Gomorrah story. So thanks everyone for that. Ben, any updates on the?
Judge pushed the case back
Of
3 weeks,
course.
so we're going to be heard on Friday, which is still before the inauguration, which is
Okay.
probably a good sign about the judge.
All right, good. So for folks who weren't here, Ben shared just a really emotional story of an asylum seeker he's working with on a legal case where when they were sexually abused, violent attack, they were called a sodomite. And so just tying into this story in the way that it's continued to be used right now um, to oppress people. So we're going to go to the end of chapter 19 is where we're opening up today, and verse 30. So Lot has escaped the city. His wife has turned back and become a pillar of salt. We talked about how that was a way to explain how a salt pillar in the middle of the desert would have come up. They would have said, oh, this is Lot's wife, and been part of the folklore of that culture. And now we get this story after Lot has left with his daughters. Remember, the daughters' spouses did not want to leave the city. We were told that. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and settled in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old. I'm going to share the screen here. And there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. On the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, look, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger rose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this day. All right, so what do you think is going on here? Why would the compiler of the book of Genesis or the compilers want to insert this story into the middle? Remember, we're trying to get to Abraham's son. We have been trying to get to Abraham's son since chapter 12. We're in chapter 19. We're still not there yet. This is the narrative of Abraham and his family, and then they put this story into it as well. Yeah, go ahead, Toby.
Well, this to me echoes a little bit the Garden of Eden, because Lot is very passive. He gets drunk if they, cloud his judgment, whatever. He doesn't even know what's happening.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, so this kind of parallels the Garden of Eden story where there's sort of this gender blaming going on. Adam acts innocent. I didn't know what was happening. They're making it seem that perhaps Lot is innocent here. He doesn't know when they come in or go out. Yeah, there are some parallels here. I do think it's interesting that there's not necessarily any judgment in the text for the two daughters. There's almost kind of a heroic element to their actions. They're working hard to preserve the family line.
Could it also be that this shows that the Moabites and the Benjamites are not quite as, they don't have a very good pedigree.
The Moabites and the Ammonites don't have a good pedigree. Yeah, I think that's absolutely what's going on here. They're inserting this as a way to say the Moabites and the Ammonites are two of the chief enemies of the Israelites. And as we've said, so many of these Canaanite cultures they're related to each other. They are coming from the same lineage. It's very hard to differentiate them. In our historical documentations, all of these people groups are so similar to each other despite the tribal warfare. And so the Ammonites and the Moabites are closely related to the Israelites, and yet they're trying to say here they don't have quite the same pedigree. This is definitely not Abraham's child. This isn't even the Ishmaelites. This isn't even Ishmael who comes from Abraham. This is Lot, and they're coming through this very just not the same way that other children are coming to the world. So they put this scene in here to make a comment about the Moabites and the Ammonites. And yet, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think I'm gonna interrupt you for 1 second and follow up on this. The title is ridiculous, in my opinion. It should be the rate of the daughters by the father. And there's a couple reasons for that. If they really are in a cave and don't have, destitute, although I think we learned that they have good fields nearby, and the father has enough wherewithal to make Pruno wine, he's obviously not going to be so easily drunk. And if he was that so easily drunk, his body physically wouldn't be able to, perform the act of holiness. And the fact that he's like, oh, I didn't know, is ridiculous. Either if you're alert or lucid enough and your body's awake, it's like sort of like taking thank God I've never had to do it, but if you do the drug test when you're pulled over, you want to walk in a straight line, but your body can't. It shows your mind is functioning, even if you're physically unable to do so. So I just have a difficult time with any sort of integrity or veracity of the story, particularly the second time. Even if you thought, I don't think you could have done it the first time, but if you do it the second time, you would have some inclination. So you've got, he was able to make wine, so he knew how to drink. His daughters presumably didn't know that all the inbreeding from the Egyptians, because the pharaohs were all inbred and were deformed, and we know that from King Tut and other carbon scientific dating. Then you have the title, which just exonerates the father. And I think we have 2 other comments about how the father is held blameless, even though he actually raped his own daughter. And later on in the Bible, in Genesis or Exodus, we do have a reference to rape in the title, but it's not here. And lastly, it just shows, I've gone on.
Oh, thanks. So Chris, trying to complicate this story. Yeah, tying it into Toby, that how are we exonerating Lot here? Lot most likely had a greater role than this text is letting on. And here we have the patriarchy continued to be baked into the text. It's putting the action on the daughter. Like I said, I think that there is some kind of heroic element that they're prescribing to the daughters for taking actions into their own hands. But I think you're absolutely right that the father played some role here. And it's kind of not true that there was no one else that they could have gone to. And so it's kind of part of the exoneration, like, oh, they had no other option. Of course they had other options. The world is full of people at this point. It's always been full of people.
If it is heroic and stuff, why are the descendants?
Shame, yeah.
Say that again?
If it is heroic, and I agree with you that it's a very, it's got a lot of things going on in a very short paragraph, because I also like the idea of disgracing or shaming the pedigree and stuff, but why the daughters are sort of heroic, they're doing, they're continuing the bloodline, et cetera, yet the descendants are first.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, well, you kind of do.
Yeah. Other comments or thoughts? Yeah, Ben?
I think it's another way to justify genocide.
Another way to justify genocide. Absolutely. So genocide is going to be perpetuated against these people groups. And it's a way to put into the text, well, we're doing this because this is the shameful offspring of Lot. Yeah, absolutely.
Just,
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Wendy?
I'm a little bit, I'm sorry, we missed last week or
That's-
last time,
That's okay.
but what was the point of destroying Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yeah, it's worth a watch if you want. It was just a really good discussion that day. But
Okay, but.
going back to
how
Sodom
is
and
it-
Gomorrah,
How is it not hypocrisy?
say more.
Well, isn't this little story here the same reason why
Hmm.
Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed?
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
I don't get it.
yeah, we talked a
Why is
lot.
this okay?
Yeah, we talked a lot 2 times ago about how the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be interpreted later in Scripture to be a story about a lack of hospitality and not necessarily about any sort of sexual sin, but also that the sin itself is not any sort of same-sex relationship. It is the attempted gang rape of a group of people meant to embarrass and oppress these foreigners coming into the land. So they don't care about Lot's daughters. They just want to humiliate these foreigners that have come into their land. And I think, but it's very similar here as well. So there is a little bit of hypocrisy. And all that to say, the text doesn't, and we're going to get that in a little bit with Abraham, the text doesn't shy away from the fact that these biblical characters are extremely flawed. And Abraham is an individual that we kind of put up on a spiritual pedestal, the ancestor of our faith, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And yet the text we get of all three characters in Genesis is lying, deceit, murder. They are so flawed. So hypocrisy, absolutely. Kevin?
Just a quick question, we scroll up just a little bit higher, introduce subtitles. Like, where are those coming from?
These are coming from the Bible translators. So this is not the original text in any
Right,
way.
We keep talking about shameful, right? I think without that, I'm not sure that we would
Hmm.
immediately got there.
Yeah.
It's pretty coarse.
You'd have to know the context of the Ammonites and the Moabites, because they don't mean much to me.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. There is some emotional coercion there. That's just such a powerful phrase, the shameful origin. I don't think we would all get there emotionally without that there. Yeah.
This is non sequitur, but I was walking in as you're talking about the father drinking wine, the women, his daughters lying with him, and all I could think of was all the banned books, but yet the Bible's gonna be able to be taught in elementary school.
Oh, yeah.
Could you imagine if your teacher,
Let's flip over to Genesis. Let's talk about our ancestor Abraham and Lot.
I just was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So is there like some sort of like incest theme with Adam and Eve having kids together, and now you have Lot and his daughters? And theoretically, Noah is also gonna, theoretically, their kids are gonna have incestual relationships.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to tie that in, I mean, this is why things like, I know why the cage bird sings is banned. And here it is right here. So spot on, Lisa.
Among other stories.
Exactly.
Sodom and Gomorrah would be one of them.
Yeah. And then your question about incest. So the value judgment would be different in this ancient culture where having sexual relations with close family members is not yet morally objectionable. So we're about to be revealed that Abraham and Sarah are actually half brother, half sister.
Why do they call it shameful then?
Well, the question is what causes it to be shameful? Is it the drunkenness? Is it that they're related to each other? Is it that he didn't know? And again, this isn't part of the original text. So
I have to say, it's obvious that if you've got a patriarchy, if these two women are real stealthy and pull this off, there's no way it's gonna end up in a biblical text if the men don't end up owning it. So at some point, Lot has to be told or remember or recognize these are his kids, or it wouldn't have even made.
okay, Shirley makes a point. I mean, within this patriarchal culture, if there was this stealth moment where they did this without Lot knowing about it, for it to end up in the text, some man along the way has to own the story and say, these are my kids, this happened, and allow it to be in the story. Yeah, no, you're totally right.
As we go through these awful stories, I'm reminded of something I was once taught, which is the very last chapter of Genesis, verse 20 says, even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good.
Yeah.
So maybe we could just think about it in that context.
Yeah. So a reference to Joseph talking to his brothers is where that verse comes from. And he tells his brothers, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And so just applying that verse to other horrific stories. Yeah. And I think that ties into the question of evil. And it's not as if God causes awful things to happen. These are definitely by human choice. But our God is powerful enough to take the awful actions made by humans, or even the awful disasters caused by nature,
By fire.
and still work good through them. Not cause them, but work good through them. Spot on. Diane?
Just referring to the comment about how the story would be passed on without plot, a male knowing it. The women still raise the children, and it could have been a female story that passed
Ooh.
to their son.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, great observation. So the women as storytellers within the family, a woman can tell the story to a son who then remembers the story and passes it on. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Well, there's also academic. My familiarity with the Bible, frankly, I've learned a lot just going through this. My familiarity comes from like a scholar or a critic like Carol Booth. And his feeling is that many of these parts of the Bible, and I forget exactly which ones, but he has a whole book about this, are written by female priestesses and stuff. And the book of S, I believe, is the name of his book. And so these accounts may very well be have been written later by women.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we have evidence, as you say, of women serving in priestess roles, of women basically doing all the work reserved only for men. And we have evidence that they're doing this work. So yeah, we don't know. The patriarchy is alive and well, suppressing women's voices, suppressing women's work. But, just thinking of the story of Shipra and Pua, these midwives subverting Pharaoh, like the women are doing the work and subverting the system constantly, even if it's not recorded. So yeah, absolutely. They're telling the stories, they're writing the stories. We just don't know about it.
And what's strange is they are the daughters of Lot. So whether they were, however they, have offspring, they are the offspring of Lot. But that isn't what they want. They want it to be male offspring, probably. They're probably shooting for that thing again.
Yeah. Surely pointing out that here are Lot's offspring already, but the fact that they're so worried is about creating this male heir.
Still shooting women in the foot
Yeah.
in some way through
Yeah.
the story. Even if the women are being clever and so forth, it still talks about how oppressed they were.
Yeah. Thanks, Shirley. Donna?
Further books written by the Latter-day Saints, including Moab maybe, and Affirming. Because you have a fairly large city called Moab in Utah, and I think why would you venerate that particular person if you really want to make them less? Unless it's in the books that, were added on by women.
That is a good question, and I'm not sure.
I don't see that town in other states. I don't think so.
Yeah, so why the city of Moab in Utah? Yeah, I'm not sure. Good question, Donna.
I'll look it up.
All right. I love this group. I did not anticipate spending 20 minutes on Lot and his daughters, but we have a lot to say. Good stuff. Anything else? All right, chapter 20. Yeah, please.
We hear of Moab again on the story of Ruth.
Ruth the Moabite, yep.
Her mother-in-law is from Moab, and this is like not very great. What a great history to have.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a very good point. So we talked about how this is trying to throw shade at the Moabites and the Ammonites. This is your origin story, which is nothing like ours. And yet they're still included in the text. Yet they're still part. Lot is favored because he is related to Abraham. He's part of the Abrahamic covenant. And so the Moabites and the Ammonites are still descended from Lot. They're still part of the story. And this is just one of the most essential subversive parts of our entire scripture, because it's going to take us all the way to Jesus. And that lineage is going to be highlighted. It's not, so Ruth's mother-in-law is Naomi. It's Ruth herself who is the Moabite. And so Ruth the Moabite is going to be the mother of Obed, who's the mother of Obed, who's the father of Jesse, who's the father of David. So we're in the whole Davidic line here with Ruth the Moabite. So the Moabites are evil and awful, and yet Ruth the Moabite shows up in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and it's going to be listed right there in the Gospels. So this is a very important element. Sure, the Moabites are enemies, yet they're still part of us. And how do we reconcile that? How do we deal with that? How do we accept that? How do we celebrate that? How do we realize that it's part of the Messiah? I don't know why I put that in quotes. Messiah coming to us. Yeah. All right, chapter 20. This story should sound familiar for those who were with us when we told the same story. From there, Abraham journeyed through the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While residing in Gerar as an alien, Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." And King Abimelech of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister,' and she herself said, 'He is my brother'? I did this in the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. Furthermore, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all that are yours." So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things, and the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that ought not be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What were you thinking that you did this thing?" Abraham said, "I did it because I thought, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, 'This is the kindness you must do to me. At every place to which we come, say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, 'My land is before you. Settle where it pleases you.' To Sarah he said, 'Look, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is your exoneration before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and also healed his wife and female slaves so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." All right. So let's go back to the beginning here. If you remember when they journeyed to foreign lands in chapter 12, we had a very similar story. What strikes you about the interaction between Abimelech and God?
You would think that if he's a foreigner, he would worship a different God.
Yeah.
And yet Yahweh is having the power to giving these nightmares to person.
Yeah, there's no intermediary here. It's direct communication with Abimelech. So Yahweh, the God of Abraham, is able, despite Abimelech worshiping other gods, to communicate directly with Abimelech. And for Abimelech to recognize what's going on, that this God, this Yahweh speaking to him, is someone that he should pay attention to and listen to and interact with. Yeah. Other thoughts about this first little paragraph?
Coercive.
Coercive. If you don't do this, then this. Yeah.
Well, and again, Sarah has no agency.
Yeah, no real perspective of Sarah here, no agency. She's told to say something. She's taken. She's kind of a pawn. Definitely. So yeah, it is unique that there's no intermediary here. Abraham does not have to speak to Abimelech on behalf of Yahweh. Yahweh talks directly to Abimelech. Abimelech's able to defend himself, and so we have further negotiations here. Look, God, how could you punish me? I'm innocent. Just like the negotiations that just took place. God, how could you destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if there are righteous people there? Would you save the city if there's 50, 40, 30, 10 righteous people? How about just one righteous person? So theologically, these people are trying to work through how does the justice and the mercy and righteousness of God all play a role in, does the righteousness of someone impact other people? If there is evil going on, but there's someone righteous and doing the right thing, will God find favor in that on behalf of the people? They're trying to wrestle with that theological question. They're coming to the answer of yes, like God cares about the righteousness of even just one person. And so Abimelech's able to negotiate, look, my hands are innocent. It is a little weird and coercive that God says, yeah, I know you're innocent because actually I stopped you from doing this, but I still told you I was going to kill you. And so there's some weirdness there of like, what exactly is God's role here? But Abimelech's able to negotiate and to say, look, I'm innocent here. I did this in the integrity of my heart. So God says, give Sarah back. So Abimelech raises up, involves his people, just like, yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
I think the question is how innocent and full of integrity is he when he starts to grab someone against their will, and the only reason that he didn't have sex with her is because God didn't let him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's levels of innocence, I guess.
Yeah. Melissa's question, how innocent is he here? He grabs someone against her will. The only reason he doesn't have sex with her is because God stops her from doing so. And we see a great struggle in these texts in the book of Genesis of here we have a very patriarchal culture where all of these texts are trying to absolve the guilt of the male party. And yet the question is, what moral agency does humanity have? That was our big question in Genesis 1-3. And so the authors of these texts, the readers of these texts, the oral tradition, they're trying to understand what moral agency do people have? And this is a question we asked today. Like I talked a few weeks ago about the concept of genital mutilation. Like that's kind of held up as, yes, cultural practices can be different. We respect other cultures, but when a culture abuses and commits gender violence, then you can no longer hide behind the veil of cultural practice. And so, yes, we have a cultural practice of patriarchy here. When the male is absolved, the female has no agency and guilt is put on the female. But I think they're wrestling with that here. Like, who does have responsibility here? God's holding Abimelech responsible. You took this person's spouse. There's responsibility there. So, Kevin?
The question basically, and we touched on this already, but it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Like I think that I'm thinking about the opposite where God pardons Pharaoh's heart.
Yeah.
Like that autonomy or agency or something is really complicated here.
Yeah. You know, I what's very interesting about the Exodus text, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, I think is like the top of my list of theological questions I can't figure out. Yeah. But what's super interesting about the Exodus text is that the tense of the verb changes. There are 3 different tenses of that verb, such that Sometimes it's God hardening Pharaoh's heart. Sometimes it's Pharaoh hardening his own heart. Sometimes it's a neutral, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, a passive. And the text changes. And I think that's interesting that the text never stays with the same verb tense or voice. So for God to say that I'm the one who stopped you from doing this is very problematic. I really don't know what to say against that. And how do we have moral agency if God can play a role in that? Shirley?
So if we don't take it quite as literally, and we see it more as not every one of those words came directly from God to Abimelech's ear, but rather Abimelech becomes aware of the knowledge that he's now really with a married woman. And if you think of this as his conscience, which, I mean, God and conscience work well together, then it's like, if you're not guilty or you don't think you've done anything wrong, but you come to the knowledge that the money you have came from a bad source. So, all the time your family was involved in something that you thought was okay, now you were old enough to know that you now have your own moral agency and you're responsible for it. And that's kind of what it sounds like God is saying to him, or his conscience is saying to him. And maybe in that way it's similar with Pharaoh, because it's not that God hardened his heart, God kind of took a step back. If God is not whispering in your ear to do the right thing, you're just more likely to fall on your own
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot there. So Shirley, go ahead, Lisa. Well, just to for the folks online, Shirley saying there's kind of a role of conscience here, which thinking of our own conscience and tying that into the voice of God is something we think about. And the moral agency comes that once Abimelech knows that what he's doing is wrong, then he has the agency to do something about it. You were saying, like, if we know the money in our family was received through ill-gotten means and we're old enough to finally understand that, then we then have a moral decision to make about what we do with that. I think that's a really great observation. And because Abimelech could at this point respond to the voice of Yahweh by ignoring it, continuing to take Sarah as his wife. But he does make a choice here to gather up his family and get Abraham together and give it back. And, he's trying to be really careful here and just giving them silver and cattle and just want to make sure that I've given you everything you need. So yeah, there is moral agency here. And I think there's something to that, the idea of conscience. Like, is it God? Theologians have dealt with the hardening of Pharaoh's heart by saying God is being attributed an action of a state that already existed. Like Pharaoh's heart is hard. And so that's being attributed to God, but that's the way his heart already was. What does the role of conscience say here when we have that voice inside of us telling us something's wrong? Is that the voice of God saying, don't do it? Lisa?
So a couple of thoughts, and when we're talking, I think context is everything. So when we're I feel like these are snapshots of these are tribal nations. So when we're looking at this and talking about agency of women and separate, I think sometimes we apply today's standards versus what was the rest of it like. I mean, we even in our culture today are thinking like what goes on in other areas and what they do women and stuff. So I'm wondering how much of this is progressive, compared to whatever else is going on in the world around them. So that was my first thought when we talked about this stuff. Secondly, I remember I came to church and my funding groups were rattled a lot, and they still are at times. But they talked about the Bible being, do we take the Bible seriously, not literally? And so I think of when, in Judaism, when people get together, they do a lot of questioning and talking, and I think out of that arises these I don't want to say truths because that's too absolute, but these themes. And so the fact that we're talking about this today, and even the struggles of hardening, but these are stories, you
Mhm,
know, I
mhm.
mean, it's like, so when we use these words, I think we have to keep that in mind, and so I think that's important, you know,
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah, yeah. Two great comments from Lisa. One, it's always important to remember the context here, that sometimes we read our modern progressive context as a lens to try to critique the text, but there are ways in which we can understand the context of that time and to make comparisons. Is the story more or less progressive than the culture around it? Definitely. And then second comment was the idea of when we take the Bible seriously but not literally, what we're doing is very much a Jewish practice of wrestling with the text. Bible study is not meant to be, okay, here's the text, here's what the text means, there's your answer. Now you know everything you need to know about Genesis 20. We do this, we wrestle, we have ideas, we have thoughts. What does this mean? What role does God play? Is it the conscience? And then we come out of here leaving with new ideas and new thoughts. The Spirit is moving. That's very much what I believe about Paul saying all of Scripture is God breathed. I've mentioned before, this is the only time that word is used in all of Greek literature. Paul makes up the word. It's just a compound word, God or Spirit, and God, the Spirit of God is moving. I think the Spirit of God is moving in this discussion right now as we wrestle with this text. Yeah, that's what that means. Melissa, and then Chris, and then Ben.
I was just thinking, it's kind of interesting, especially in our time. Stories also, the stories we're talking about are the difference between cultural morality and a more universal morality. So everything that Alec was doing he was, you know, trying to, within his culture, do the right thing.
Yeah.
But but then God is stepping in and offering him a more universal.
Yeah, yeah. So we need to keep that in mind always. What is the cultural morality versus the universal morality? They're trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure it out. Chris?
So just following up on these 2 points, is the subtext here that, once again, incest is fine, but also bigamy and inheritance are also fine, because he already has at least one wife.
Yeah. Again, in terms of, anyone doing a critique of, if you're getting your sexual morality from Old Testament scriptures and using that to condemn consensual monogamous same-sex relationships, well, the Old Testament's full of incest and polygamy by your major spiritual figures. So, tying it to Melissa's question of cultural morality versus universal morality, the truth of these times is our spiritual forebears practiced incest and polygamy with no moral qualms about it.
Yeah, it also seems like God is saying that's fine. That's not the issue.
Yeah.
The way it's written, at least that's how it is.
Yeah. They would not understand God condemning it yet.
We haven't got any 10 Commandments yet.
Yeah. Ben?
I was just gonna add, I think there's obviously a lot going on here, but, applying my historical materials lens, I see just another justification for taking the land. And it reminds me of, like those stories of the Anglo-Saxons conquering Britain and how, it's written down that, oh, they invited us, and I just call my cousins, and a lot of those, hit stories of settlers and colonization are, there's some kind of justification, whether it's a land without people for people without land or whatever it is. And here it's like, oh, they gave me this land because the guy tried to steal my wife, but ultimately the reality is that they did take the land.
Yeah. So Abimelech is in the land of the Philistines, is the region we've arrived at now. That's a really good observation, Ben, that's what the text says. Abimelech said, my land is before you, settle where it pleases you. We're laying little seeds. So if anyone been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? So this is a famous church in Jerusalem, and the church is divvied up 2 different Christian sects by the tile on the floor and the lamp on the wall. This lamp belongs to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. This pillar belongs to the Coptic church. And what will happen is all of these groups have representatives in the church, and someone will start mopping a floor that's not theirs. And they'll mop it every night. And then they'll say, this belongs to us. I've been mopping it for 2 years now. This is ours. It's kind of like what's happening here. These little seeds are being planted. Like, they told me this land is ours, so we have the right to take it. And they will.
Right? Oh, sorry. I just had one point. At the very last sentence, why are only women being punished? Sort of just like how Eve has to suffer pregnancy, but there's no Adam doesn't have, you know, punishment of incompetence or pain during, you know, procreation. It seems like it's not the men who similar are going to be impotent or unable to have kids. It's only the women who are bearing the burden.
For fertility to be blamed only on the woman is something that happens today too. You all know Jen and I are going through our own fertility journey, and through this whole thing, the number of doctors who have never assumed that I had any role potentially in the infertility, it's just assumed it's always Jen. So that's the reality for sure. Shirley?
Does everybody else feel the same way that I do? It's like, it's great Abimelech holds him accountable for this ridiculous, you know, half lie. But I'd love to see God get in his face a little bit. You know, it's like, he's been getting away with a lot of stuff.
Abraham's been getting away with a lot of stuff, yeah. And this text is going to come right before the birth of Isaac. And so we have another story, and you've been so good, Diane, about helping us realize that like humanity is flawed. We mentioned that earlier in today's lesson, but these last couple of sessions, you brought that up again and again, that humanity is not perfect here. There's sin here. There's flawed here. The life of faith is one of both faith and doubt. And so we get this story of Abraham right before the birth of Isaac, where he is failing. And so you said, I'd like to see God get in Abraham's face a little bit here. Like, why are you so afraid? Why are you doing this? I've told you what's going to happen, and here you are disbelieving it again and again. All right, that's all we have time for today. So next week, we will begin with the birth of Isaac, another sad story between Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael. Abimelech's going to come back on the scene. And if we have time, we'll get to one of the most controversial texts in Scripture, which is the binding of Isaac. All right, let me close this with a word of prayer. God, we thank you for this opportunity to do what Paul spoke about, to breathe the Spirit of God into these words, to bring it alive, to bring it within our community, to bring it as a dialogue between each other, to bring it into our lives today, and to think about the ways in which you are moving and speaking to us and guiding us even today. We pray for everyone affected by the local fires. We pray that people for the long term can respond and provide these folks with what they need, and to help them in this really dire time, that somehow, God, something that was meant for destruction can somehow see good come out of it. As we think about land and genocide and people stealing from one another, we also pray, as always, for all of those in Palestine right now affected by genocide, affected by war, affected by bombings. May your Spirit please come and work through your creation to bring peace to the land. In Christ's name, amen. All right, thank you, folks. Let's see. When do they get posted? Usually by Wednesday, Sarah. Our social media folk get them up. The last session's not up yet, but we're going to fix that tomorrow. All right, see you in worship.